Welcome to Podcast Done For You, the show where we make it as easy as possible for you to make the right choices to advance your podcasting career. So let's get started on the show. What do you need to know to get your podcast started? It's a very important question that one must answer, and I'm going to give you everything you need to know in this episode, so stay tuned. There's lots of gold in here, and there are lots of things that we're just going to cut through and give you what you need with no fancy time being spent on lots of unnecessary bits and pieces. Of course, this episode, like all of them in the Podcast Done For You show, is brought to you by, strangely enough, Podcast Done For You, where our mission is to expose your brilliance, and we do that by doing the podcast for you. So if you want the very short answer to what you need to do to get started, then just contact us, and then you don't need to watch the rest of the video. But if you want to do it yourself, then stay tuned, because we're going to get into it right now. So the first thing you need to do when you're thinking about a podcast is, what is the actual point of the podcast? Think about that in the first instance. If you understand what your podcast is going to do for your business, then you will have a pretty good idea as to the trajectory that you want to go on. But if you're unsure about what the podcast is going to do for your business, then take a breath and think about it. What it does for your business is it builds your credibility, gives you huge amounts of content, gives you an opportunity to speak to an audience that is much larger than you could possibly physically get to, whether it's on the phone or in a networking meetings, and it's constantly there. It's there to expand and to grow, to attract people when they want to listen. You might be watching this, for example, right now, moments after I publish it, or you might be watching this. I might have got rid of this shirt already. It might have worn its time. So it doesn't really matter. This is here for you for the long term, and that's what you should think about with your podcast as well. Now, once you understand what the point of your podcast is, you can start thinking about a name, and the name really needs to appeal to your audience and to appeal also to the nature of what it is that you're trying to achieve with the podcast. But remember, you can change names of your podcast relatively easily, so don't feel like the world's going to collapse on you if you come up with a name and then a little while down the track you think, oh, should really change that, because you can, and it's not all that difficult. But you want something that is going to appeal and align with your brand as well. So now there are some other things that you need to think about. Once you have a name, once you have the direction of the podcast, you now have to start thinking about what's going to be on the podcast. Is it just going to be like this one is, and it's just me talking? Is it going to be like my BizBytes podcast, where I interview guests from around the world who are in the professional services B2B space, and we try and enhance that with more information all the time? That's an idea where you're inviting guests onto the program. It brings in some other criteria, and we'll come to that in a little while. But the other opportunity that you can think about is, do you want to engage with just one other person? And is that a regular thing, or is it just an alternating thing? So there are lots of things that you need to consider as to who is actually going to appear on the podcast, because the more people you have, the harder it is to coordinate, and the more opportunities there are to not stuff up, but to try and build the chemistry and to make sure you're getting across the right information. So once you have a format decided, then you need to start thinking about the time that the podcast is going to go on for. Is it going to be a 10-minute podcast, 15-minute podcast, 20, 30, an hour, 3 hours? There is no absolute right or wrong. The sweet spot generally seems to be around the half-hour mark in terms of people liking those podcasts, but there's a lot to say, and a lot of my clients, for example, prefer the 15 to 20-minute podcasts. It's a nice little burst that people can get on their way to and from work, or in a short walk, or anything like that they're listening into. And again, how often? Again, many people choose to put them out every 2 weeks. Some people put them out daily. Some people put them out every week. There's no right or wrong to it. What I would say is, when it's more than 2 weeks apart, it's probably going to do you a little bit hard to build an audience, because people aren't used to looking for it So I would definitely be considering the idea of having it no less than every 2 weeks, but 15 to 20 minutes episodes every 2 weeks is not that arduous, gives you a huge amount of exposure and opportunity to really push each episode out there, something we'll get to in a little bit. So what else do you need to think about? You've now got the basic format sorted, you've got the length sorted, you've got how often you're going to put it out there. Now you need to start thinking also about some of the incidentals. You've got graphics that you'll need for the shows, and you can have a graphics for the overall show as well as the graphics for each individual episode. Particularly if you're putting them on YouTube, it's a good idea to try and make each episode look a little bit different. Now, what else do you need to know? There's a lot here, and I told you we were going to cut straight into it and give you this long list. So you keep listening, keep taking those notes. So what else do you need to do? You need to think about what's going to be in the show notes for the program. How will you describe the program overall, and how will you describe each individual episode? The good news is, once you have a platform, and we'll come to that in a moment, to load all of your content to, then quite frankly, there are AI tools out there that will help you come up with some of those things that you need for each episode. So for each episode, as well as the overall content, you're going to need content to say what is the brief description of an episode so people know why they might want to listen into. Remember, they're not always going to be people who know you or know all of your content. So you want that bit to be engaging and to grab them. You need a headline for each episode. Again, AI tools will help you with that, as will doing some simple searches on YouTube to find out what people are actually looking for. If you find out what they're searching for and there's lots of traffic coming to those things, it's a good idea. That's a pretty good place to start for a headline for your podcast. If you go to something and there's absolutely no traffic going to any of the videos, for example, that come up in there, then it's a good indication that it's probably not a topic that people are searching for, so why use it? So there are a few little insights and tips. We're rattling off lots and lots of things here. Now, what you need to do then is you need to also think of what platform are you going to use for publishing, I should say, your podcast. There aren't many platforms out there. I started off on a platform that is now been taken over by Spotify, called Spotify for Podcasters. It is a free platform, which is a great way to start and put your toe in the water of podcasting without you having to spend any real money. That being said, I am a big advocate for the platforms that do so much more for you and are much more convenient and are purpose-built, and they're built to really work for you rather than a free platform which is designed to really suck information into Spotify in particular and is a bit more restricted in what you can do, although I know it is improving all the time. I would advocate for Captivate.fm. That's what we use for our podcast, and we publish to multiple platforms very easily. Gives you lots of free tools and free information that comes alongside of the stuff you are paying for as well. Lots of good help and support. Highly recommend Captivate as your platform. Again, depends on your budget. Then you've got now to all of the background stuff that's sorted. But you need to come to the critical bits. So I'm going to refer you to the most critical part of the podcast. And we've talked about it before. In fact, there is a special episode dedicated just to this topic. Microphone. Which microphone do you choose? There are lots of choices out there, and there are lots of videos that you could watch about different microphones. But I'm going to tell you, you can listen to the full podcast that I have explaining why certain microphones are better than others and the ones that you should really use. But if you want to cut right to the chase, I recommend the Rode NT USB Plus. It is an easy microphone to use. It plugs in via, as the name suggests, via a USB port. It provides a few little buttons and adjustments that you can make on the microphone itself. It's a good quality one. It's not particularly expensive. It's not cheap either. And it's a good solid place to start, and it's what many podcasters use. So that's one to recommend. You'll watch in that other video things like don't use headsets, don't use lapel microphones unless you're paying a fortune for them, don't use cheap little microphones that you can find somewhere. Either you use a decent quality microphone or you can even use your phone. Again, all covered in that separate video. Now, the next part is you need to decide, is it an audio only or is it a video based podcast? Again, I have another dedicated show to exactly that point. Needless to say to you that it is a personal choice. Now, when you think about it, most people are just listening to podcasts. Even those of you that are watching right now on YouTube, technically, are you actually on your particular screen at the moment watching me, or are you doing other things while this is playing in the background? As much as I want you to be watching me, and hello to all of you that are, the chances are that you've got other things going on. That's the nature of podcasts. So is video crucial? No, it's not. Is it a nice thing to be able to do? Yes, it is. And it's particularly helpful when you break content up and put it on social media. That's when video can be nice to have, but it does require more effort. If you're doing the podcast yourself, it is more effort involved in editing the video, because when you say cough, all of those kinds of things, and you want to take it out, if you're editing in video, that is a lot harder. You need cutaways to other things to be able to do that, or you get jumps. It becomes complicated. Audio is much easier to do, and in fact, many of the platforms will actually take out a lot of the ums and ahs for you automatically, very simply, which comes to the platform that you need to use for editing your podcast. Again, there are many tools out there, free tools as well, where you can edit audio. Some platforms allow you to edit audio on them. I believe Spotify does do that. I would think that a better way to go is a specialized tool that allows you to not only record the audio in the first place and video if that's what you want, also to do all the editing and bringing all the AI tools and everything into it. I personally recommend Descript. It is a fantastic tool. There are others out there. I'm not going to bother going through all of those right now, but I will say to you, Descript is a great place to start. Descript incorporates Squadcasts, so you've got your recording opportunity. You can bring guests in if you want to. You can monitor audio and video levels, all of those fancy things. You can cut out echoes from noise cancellation. You've got AI tools built into it. It's a great tool to use, but it is a lot of things that you need to work out how to do. Again, I'm going to come back to my original point. Why are you doing this? Podcast Done For You is here to help you and to do all this stuff for you. You don't need to know it all yourself. It's going to take you a lot of time to learn how to use it in the first place. Then there's a lot of time doing all of this stuff with every episode that you want to put out. Your time is better spent elsewhere, like actually publicizing the finished product, as well as doing what you do best in whatever your job is and what your expertise is. So, Podcast Done For You. Details are sitting below in the chat. So now we are also going to come to something else, and ignore that phone ringing in the background that you heard just there. See, this is live. We're not going to edit that out. But you would do if you were doing a proper podcast that you want on a very professional level where you're interviewing people. You probably wouldn't have had the phone on in the first place. Rookie error. Something else to remember, a little bit of advice. Now, what else can we talk about? There are other things that you need to think about, like what's your background going to be? In the case of here, we've set up a particular studio environment and I've got lots of lights and things going on here. Again, if you're not using video, it's a heck of a lot easier. You don't need to worry too much about it. I would suggest to you that you use a natural background. Avoid the virtual stuff. The virtual stuff looks like virtual stuff and isn't really interesting for people to see. You can set up studios very easily in your home office, your work office, wherever that is. You can often use natural light and background depending on the time of day that you're recording. You want to make sure your face is nicely lit. You want to make sure that your background is remotely interesting, but you don't need to spend lots of money on doing that. And you certainly do not need to have a whole padded studio. Sometimes it is good to be in a quieter space so you don't have lots of noise coming through on your podcast and having to edit that out all the time. But again, with the right microphone and the right editing tool, a lot of that stuff will disappear for you. What else do you need to know to get your podcast out and happening? You just need to have then, once you've got all of that sorted and you've gone through an editing process, it's good to have a bit of music and to someone to voice an introduction and an ending for your podcast. So you need to think about those things as well. AI tools can help you with some of the writing of it, but you want to get some music. There is lots of free music you can use. Again, Podcast Done For You. We have a person in-house that designs music specifically for your podcast. So you don't even have to worry about it. No copyright problems there at all because we do it for you with some unique bit of music. So what else do you need to know? We're almost at the end of the list. But I do want to say for those of you using video, invest in a decent camera. You don't need to spend a fortune. You can use some of the Logitech style cameras that might cost you $100 or so. They're pretty good. They're not as great as starting to get into specialized video cameras like the PTZ Optics Studio Pro that I have operating just here. There are many DSLR cameras that work a treat as well. The more complicated the camera, the more that you have to learn about what to do with it. Again, if you're doing audio only podcasts, then you don't need to worry about all of that stuff. Finally, because I don't want to exhaust you too much, think about how you are going to push it out there. So your platform will publish it for you on multiple platforms, and that's great. You'll be able to set it up on a YouTube channel. You can do that. That's easy enough to do as well. YouTube podcasts is definitely a place you need to be publishing, but again, you don't necessarily need video to do that, little tip. But you need to be able to publicize it. You need a social media audience. You need a database that you're going to be emailing. You need people that are going to talk about your podcast. It's one of the great reasons why you bring guests on, because guests will publicize your podcast, which is what you want. You want to encourage people to subscribe as often as possible. So, subscribe. Hit the subscribe button just below wherever you are. Hopefully you're on YouTube right now. Hit the subscribe button on YouTube for me. Much appreciated. Hit it on any other channel that you are listening to this particular podcast on as well. Leave a comment. Let us know if there's something else you want us to cover in future episodes. I've wanted to make this a really big list, but not too exhaustive, but exhaustive enough to give you an idea of what's ahead of you in planning your podcast. If you are overwhelmed with all of this, come talk to me. Podcast done for you. Before we go, and I just wanted to reiterate this as well, is that do watch the special edition of Podcast Done For You, the show, where we talk about the numbers game. Because if you are thinking that the podcast needs to immediately get thousands and thousands of downloads, then you are probably operating in the wrong space. Businesses don't tend to get thousands of downloads straight away unless you are a celebrity of some description. And that is, I'm not talking celebrity in the entertainment business, I'm talking about even celebrities within the business stratosphere. Those people, you've got big audiences, that's fantastic. You're not competing with them, you're competing with yourself. The podcast is there to help open doors for you, to provide opportunities for people to get to know you, to come and find you in the future, because then they know you and want to work with you. So think about all of that as you move forward. I hope you've appreciated everything that is in this list. Yes, it is a dump of information. There is a lot to do and a lot to think about, but there is the simpler way. I remind you, as I said at the beginning, podcast done for you. That's what we are here to do. So you don't have to worry about much of this stuff at all. In fact, you just need to show up as an expert for a recording session and you're done. We do the rest. So I hope this has been of some support for you. Do hit subscribe. Look forward to your comments and your company next time on Podcast Done For You, the show.